Next we have up Laurie Yoler, the SVP of Development at Qualcomm Technologies, and Alice Van Diggelen, and she's the host of Fresh Dialogues and has a segment called Innovation and the Democratization of Power. Thank you.
And most importantly, we're color coordinated today, which is very important.
Completely unplanned. So today, Laurie and I are going to talk about power, how to get it, how to retain it, and also about the democratization of power, how innovation is spreading power around Silicon Valley and around the world. So I want to start by talking about definitions. Laurie, can you help us by exploring what is your definition of power?
I think Jeffrey Pfeffer's talk was really interesting because I think some of the structures and the disciplines from what we've known about power still very much resonate. However, I spend a lot of time with friends talking more about Joseph Nye's work and the difference between hard power and soft power and what that means, and finding examples of not just the traditional disciplines, but where we see soft power. Hard power he defines as the carrot and the stick, and we know that incentives and payments and fear still factor into power, but we also see lots of examples of soft power, and certainly here in Silicon Valley, the ability for an entrepreneur to have that David and Goliath story come true and to inspire and to have some idealism and want to go after that big goal and have that power of influence rather than just the hard power that we know about. The other thing I think about is I just got an opportunity to spend a week at the X Prize Foundation where they brought in a lot of thinkers, and I come from a computer science background, so when we talk about power in the computing industry, it's high performance computing and the ability to process lots of data very, very fast. And I think about the fact that as we're talking about neuromorphic computing and we're talking about the singularity, we're thinking about the power of the machine and the power of the brain in much more interesting terms. And so I often think that power in the future is going to be a little bit more like computer power, where it's the ability to take in information from all those different places, synthesize it rapidly, and be able to communicate decisions and to make judgments based on massive data. And that's going to be a new source of power in the future.
Good one, big data, for sure. That's a real hot topic. I would add to that, for me, power means the power to influence people and events. And again, focused on Silicon Valley, it's the hotbed of let's change the world. More than one company has that as their modus operandi. Let's talk about sources of power. I mean, obviously, power derives from knowledge and expertise, but in your world, where have you found that power is coming from?
In technology, it has really been from new ideas and innovation and the ability to harness a small team of fantastic people and certainly attract people or place yourself in environments where you can be talking to people who can complement where our weaknesses are and create a more powerful team around ourselves. And one of the metaphors that I like a lot is we used to say be a sponge, and now it's be a sensor. So be out there taking in input from many different areas. So truly, there are lots of sources of information, and obviously, technology just gives us more sources faster. But we can be that sensor and find power from many different places and pull small teams of people together, both online and in a physical location.
Right, and probably part of that is having a filter, because there's almost like too much information out there. So having a good filter is really important.
Absolutely.
So talking about Jeffrey's presentation, I like his analogy with David beat Goliath by changing the rules. And we're going to get on to maybe some specific examples of a company, or one company, at least one company that you're very familiar with, Tesla Motors, and how they've changed the rules. But for now, let's talk about I want to talk about, when Laurie contacted me and said, let's talk about innovation and democratization of power, my immediate thought was MOOCs, massive open online courses. In other words, education for the masses. I think that's a really important area to talk about. It's something that is starting here in Silicon Valley. We have Stanford's Sebastian Thrun, founded Udacity. We have Coursera, free education for the masses. The Economist recently talked about MOOCs might drop the price of traditional universities by as much as a third, which is long overdue. It's becoming a big obstacle to a lot of people getting education, both here and abroad. And The Economist is predicting it may create a lucrative business by offering university credits. In the UK, just last week, their MOOC, Future Learn, was launched, and they had a fanfare about unleashing and unbundling education. But the interesting thing about that is two of the top universities there, Oxford and Cambridge, are saying they're not playing the game. So it'll be interesting to see if they warm up to it or what the future holds for that. The other part about MOOCs is it's still a work in progress. Like many innovations, it takes iterations. It's been criticized for the very high failure rate. There was an example in San Jose State. They tried it for various courses, and the failure rate was up to 90%. They paused their experiment for a while, and they have restarted with better results. But I think the lesson with that is, for any innovation, you have to keep iterating and keep improving and studying the results. The data is a big helper. Last week in New York, Condoleezza Rice was part of the Summit on Higher Education in New York, and she pointed out, I mean, there are a lot of naysayers like any new innovation, but she pointed out the fact that MOOCs isn't the solution to every education need, of course. The innovation and thought processes that happen to make startups in Silicon Valley, it can't be done online. It's this magic melting pot, if you like, this ecosystem of professors and students and graduate students and the venture capitalists and this whole Silicon Valley ecosystem, that it can't be done online, only online with videos. It will be a supplement but never a replacement. I think these are two important points about the future of MOOCs. Are you optimistic about MOOCs?
First, I'm very optimistic about education and making education accessible to many more people. A couple of the case studies that really resonated with me. One, I met Saul Khan when he was first starting the Khan Academy, and I think I was at one of his first public appearances when he just had this dream, and he was, as many of you have heard the story, just tutoring his cousin and was one of the first users of YouTube to do so. And then it really grew up, and I think we saw him evolve working with one of the local school districts here to figure out where the video actually played and where the teacher could be more effective, and they're still experimenting. You talked about we're in experimentation stage, and I think like any new technology or science, we have to experiment and try a lot of new things before we figure out what works. The other example is the TED Talks. I'm a longtime TEDster, and it used to be only a few people could actually attend and listen to those incredibly inspiring talks. And when the TED Talks first went online, people were shocked and thought it would be a terrible denigration of the brand to allow all of these videos to go online for anyone to consume. And it became part of a lot of coursework. And I know a lot of teachers who use TED Talks as part of their now education curriculum. So I think we're going to see a lot of creativity in that space. And I think the education space is undergoing a lot of disruption right now, and there are a lot of good experiments that are being tried.
Great. Talking of disruption, an example that Laurie and I are both familiar with is Tesla Motors, and they've really been a major disruptor by proving that electric cars can not only be profitable, but they can be sexy and successful too with the Model S. There are other ways that they have stolen power or are in the process of taking power, not just from established car companies for being on the cutting edge, but for their fight with the dealerships, that they have come up with a new way of breaking the rules. They want to sell cars, or they are selling cars successfully straight to the consumers. And of course, the dealerships are up in arms about that. So that'll be one to watch. But again, it's a story of, the David versus the big three and more. breaking the rules and saying we're doing it our way. And so for all the entrepreneurs in the audience, it's definitely something to think about, that just because something is the way it is doesn't mean that that is necessarily a complete obstacle to you doing it your way. Go for it. The other aspect of Tesla Motors is if EVs do go mainstream, it could shift the demand for oil, which of course would bring in a whole geopolitical sphere to the balance of power. So, Laurie, would you like to share some of your insights? You were a founding board member of Tesla Motors way back when, over 10 years ago. Tell us about what it was like to be within that scrappy startup and playing for new power paradigms.
One of the things that has attracted me to working with startups and new ventures throughout my career is it is so exciting to start with a blank sheet of paper and not have the restrictions of concern about product cannibalization that Jeffrey Moore obviously famously talks about. And one of the differences when starting with such a small company is you are breaking the rules, you're setting the rules, you're starting out, and you don't have to worry about typically an internal bureaucracy or politics. There's where the soft power of influence and communication and narrative and story becomes so critical, because you're a small team. And when we went out to initially get funding for Tesla Motors, everyone that we talked to laughed at us and said, you'll never be able to take on the automakers, you'll never be able to take on the dealer franchises. And we heard that over and over and over again, and it almost becomes empowering when you hear it so many times that you're onto something good when everyone you talk to is a naysayer. But it takes a huge amount of courage and tenacity to be able to continue going forth when all of the experts in the industry really are against you, and you're really trying to break glass and do something new.
And what was it that kept you going forward? Because that's a key thing, because I was watching the race yesterday, the America's Cup, and talk about a stunning comeback. And it resonated with the whole Churchill Club thing, never, ever, ever, ever give up, right? What an example. So can you tell us from the Tesla Motors point of view, with all these naysayers coming at you, how did you guys rally to say, we can do this?
It comes back to the people and the team. And I remember in the early days, the engineers were off trying to initially do battery testing and building a new electric motor and figure out how the entire drivetrain was going to be assembled and how we were going to source from the large automotive suppliers when none of them thought we were even going to make it as a company. And so when everything is against you, you look around and it's the power of the team. And I remember walking around from door to door at Tesla, and an engineer would grab me and say, Laurie, you won't believe it. Look at this cool new thing we discovered. Look at what we're doing here. And look, we're doing this testing, and look what we found out. And the excitement was infectious around the company, and it's still that way to this day. There are a lot more people there, and there's a lot more people that are excited about the company. But from those early days, it's why I have surrounded myself with engineers. I come from a family of engineers and scientists and biochemists and physicists. And if you just think about it, a scientist says, hey, I'm going to experiment, and I'm going to continue experimenting until I find something that works, and I'm going to learn as part of the process. An engineer says, wow, we have a problem. Let's try to solve it. Fundamentally, if you look at engineers and scientists, they say, of course there's a problem, and I'm here to figure out how to solve it, and that's okay. And so, yes, there were problems all the way through, and one of the problems is that people on the outside didn't think we were going to make it. But when you're in a company of engineers, it's just another problem to solve, and you go step by step until you solve it. And it's that mindset that I think makes engineering culture so exciting. And I've just joined a very large engineering company at Qualcomm, and it's whether it's a large or a small company, I think that kind of philosophy that you see with scientists and engineers is really exciting.
Great. Well, I'd like to get back to that, comparing your power within a large company like Qualcomm compared to what you were doing before. But first, I think it's really important to talk about crowdfunding and microlending, because there's a wonderful example of innovation enabling the sharing of power around the world. For example, Mohammed Yunus, Kiva is doing some amazing work with microlending. I was reading today about M-Pesa, which is a mobile banking system that is allowing people in Kenya to transfer money just via their mobile phones. They're way ahead of us. In Kenya, they have 4 million people who have bank accounts, but 10 million people are using this system. So talk about breaking the rules and game changing. There's a wonderful example that is empowering people who wouldn't be able to do that otherwise. Also, we can talk about the Skoll Foundation, which is empowering social entrepreneurs around the world. They are creating, or they're backing social entrepreneurs like Benetech, which is an online platform that allows various companies, nonprofits, to build off it. For example, there's a Bookshare company that allows online book sharing for people with disabilities. For example, if you cannot read, you can listen to books, and they have one of the biggest online sharing for books on tape that there is in the world. So they are sharing that power with the world. There's another open source company called Murata that they're supporting, which allows software for environmental protection. So these are just some of the examples of microlending. Is that something that you're familiar with or excited about, Laurie?
Certainly, social entrepreneurship has a big resonance, and I think I have also worked as an investment banker, and it was surprising to me in many ways that it was still a very hierarchical model in investment banking, and there were definitely the haves and the have-nots, and the connections to the people with power and money were very restrictive, and the ability to get an investment banking license. And I think during the financial crisis, we saw so many small businesses that were not able to get funded. And as we've seen the venture industry morph over time, I think there was a huge opportunity for people to come in as angel investors. And I've been a longtime angel investor with my husband. And I think what we have seen with AngelList and with Indiegogo and Kickstarter and SomoLend and so many others is the organization of those folks and the bringing of technology to that, because I think you've always had angel investors who have been wanting to fund various both philanthropic and non-philanthropic ventures, but now it's much more organized. It's much easier for a vast number of people to go online. I have a son who 1 week asked for an increase in his allowance, and I said, why do you need an increase for your allowance? And he said, because I've got so many things I want to fund on Kickstarter. And I thought, wow, interesting. That's really fascinating that you want to use your allowance that way. And I think we learn so much about these new things from the younger generation who want to have a social purpose in what they're doing. One other example in the democratization of technology, that same son who's now 19, fortunately is a good writer, and he wrote a blog one day on a site called Medium on 3D printing and synthetic biology. And he wrote this article, and the next week it became the #1 article on Medium, and a very powerful business executive who's well known in Silicon Valley actually reached out to him and invited him over for dinner after reading his blog. And this is my 19-year-old kid who probably would have had no other way to meet that gentleman. And so there's an example of the old power structure really breaking up, where someone can write a blog and put it online and suddenly get noticed without having to hire a PR firm and try to go to conferences and hobnob with senior executives. So I think these are great examples of democratization, of being able to access those angel investors and having that great narrative, which is, I think, what Kickstarter and SomoLend and Indiegogo have shown is you've got your passion for an idea or a social cause. If there's someone in your family has a rare disease and you're trying to raise money to put together a Michael J. Fox kind of foundation for that disease, you see those platforms being used for things like that as well. So a lot of creativity we're seeing going on online, and certainly harnessing the power of video and telling a great story and having a great narrative.
It sounds like you've got a wonderful entrepreneur in your hands. You might be able to retire soon. So one interesting thing I noticed in the last few days, California PUC became the first state in the nation to regulate car sharing. In other words, giving the green light to car sharing companies like Sidecar, Lyft. And this is a really interesting development to me, that the fact that there's the green light, and the government is waking up to the fact that, yes, disruptors will come in, and the existing monopolies or semi-monopolies of existing taxi services are going to crumble. That I feel is part of a trend of the government waking up to adapting to this peer-to-peer commerce that is happening. So again, that's another example of disrupting power in an established industry. Do you have comments on that, or any other examples that you're excited about?
I'm very excited about autonomous vehicles in general, and had a chance to visit Google X, and I rode in their first Prius and got a chance to ride in their Lexus a couple weeks ago, and was very excited to see Uber announcing that they're planning to use some of these vehicles. And I think it's tremendous, because Google's motive is not because it's cool technology, it's because giving people their time back, they have determined is a really important thing for society, because time is becoming our most scarce resource. So why should you be spending time in the car, driving, looking for directions, all of that? So I think that's going to be very interesting. I saw in the news this morning that rental car stocks are plummeting, and I think one of the reasons is people are renting a lot less cars these days, because these services make a lot of sense. It does get your time back. I'm one of those people who takes Uber and sits in the back seat and does conference calls now, instead of renting a car in the back of the car. So I think it was interesting, though, from a legislative standpoint, to both watch how legislators are handling autonomous vehicles, as well as how they're handling rideshare services, and how those airport fees are or are not applying to these ride-sharing services. So it's been fascinating to watch the regulations trying to catch up with these technologies.
Right. And talking of rental cars, I noticed that I think it's at SFO and down in LAX, you can now rent a Model S. They just brought them on. I think it's Hertz that's doing that. So yeah, I thought that was quite interesting today. So let's talk about the internet and social media. Of course, you know, Facebook and Twitter in a very American-centric fashion took a lot of the credit for the Arab Spring, etc. You know, they called it the Twitter revolution. Of course, that was over-exaggeration. You know, fair to say that they perhaps enabled greater communication and accelerated the process, but the revolution really took part on the streets. But let's talk about the power of social media to spread the word. We talked earlier about Peter Gabriel's Witness program, that, you know, Twitter took a lot of the credit for getting the word out and helping people assemble on the streets. But Peter Gabriel's Witness program has been doing it for 20 years. They've been helping people record abuses, human rights abuses on video, and sharing that, and then using Google apps or Google Earth to identify where abuses were taking place in Kenya during the presidential elections. So that is, you know, one of the examples of where they're using internet and social media for spreading the word and giving people the power. Do you have any other examples, Laurie?
You know, one of the things that's very exciting for me in mobile devices is it used to be only the people that happen to have a camera or a video recorder in their pocket or have access to one could record something that's going on. And obviously now we have 7 billion mobile devices out there. They're expected to have 7 billion more smartphones that will be shipped in the next 5 years. 160 billion apps are expected to be downloaded in the next few years. So to me, the mobile device has given everyone an incredible opportunity to be a citizen journalist, reporter, capture whatever's happening around the world. And so to me, obviously, Qualcomm believes strongly in mobile devices and enabling new mobile devices, including devices like these that are I'm very excited about as well in wearables, but allows people to both record video and to send those tweets from anywhere they are in the world. And I think that infrastructure is another example of more of the distribution of power to many more people.
Great. Now we have about 2.5 minutes left. So Karen asked us to give you some takeaways. We have a lot more we could cover. We had a short amount of time, but I prepared 3 takeaways for you today. The first is Elon Musk is someone I've interviewed in depth at the Computer History Museum, and he's been successful in so many different areas. So one of the big takeaways for me from that interview was getting power is to do with getting people to believe in you and your idea. And the other small note on that, but is very important, is work bloody hard. He talked about how he actually did some tests, like a true geek or engineer. He did some tests to work out the minimum amount of sleep he could get by on to keep his high productivity up, and it's about 6 hours, for reference. The other takeaway is remember BlackBerry, especially if you're with a big established company. You have to keep innovating to keep that power. And finally, Reid Hoffman is someone I've been following for a long time. I think he's a really smart guy, and he has the science background and the philosophy background. He has a degree from Oxford in philosophy. You may not know that. I thought that was fascinating. And his advice for power, for getting power, is fulfill a need, solve problems, change the world. That simple. Laurie?
One other comment on Jeffrey Pfeffer's work is that he was saying that warmth and competence are negatively correlated. However, I would argue that it is a luxury of the bad behavior of bosses, because I think when we have choice, like we do in Silicon Valley, people can choose to work for people who actually can show that warmth and can take that extra step and be a great leader that rules with soft power rather than hard power. And I think it's taking an extra step, as many of the discussions earlier on meditation and exercise and all those things to get anger under control. I think that warmth should be more important for future leaders. And then certainly lifelong learning. I think, as we talked about with education, being a lifelong learner doesn't really matter where you go to school, undergrad. You can continue learning, and there's so many new opportunities to learn now. I'm very excited about that opportunity. I guess, let's see, anything else I'd like to say? I think, and then the prizes, supporting these various prizes like the X Prize and many of these other prizes that we're seeing, I think that's going to be a really interesting thing to watch in terms of anyone being able to contribute their expertise or try for a new goal and try to create something new and break the rules. We're democratizing that as well. And so I'm excited about the prize culture that we have right now.
And I would just echo when Jeffrey said competence and warmth are inversely related. You can't have one without the other, or they tend to influence one another. I sat there thinking, what about Sheryl Sandberg? She's both warm and very competent. So there's an example. And I agree.
Irwin and Paul Jacobs are fantastic examples at Qualcomm, where they're extremely warm leaders and also very bright and fantastic engineers and men.
Great. Thank you very much.